So with all of the stimulus, with the constant feed that we feel, so I'll pose you a question. So if your version of Jesus Christ were to be here and present within a discernible frequency that you can interpret, how would you feel about it? Now, this is rhetorical, but how would you feel? Would you think it's a psyop? Would you think it's controlled opposition? Or would you be too exhausted to even thoroughly examine the notion in the first place? You notice that they are gaining ground the more you feed into the stimulus. Because when you have the emotional reaction to all of the external, there's a consent that takes place that you may or may not be aware of. So that's why movies are always such a thing. They put all this money into production, and these movies they're nothing. They're gone, and then they're just destined for the Walmart discount rack. It's like, why would they put so much into that? Got to create the narrative, right? They can't create reality, but they surely can attempt to hijack perception. So the more things that you see out there, like movies and like all of these false questions, global warming being a really good one. Now, before you fly off the handle, we can appreciate your willingness to care, your willingness to be compassionate. But as we see, they're far more often weaponized, because if you speak of global warming and the misnomer that it is, and I'll tell you why in a second, you're feeding into a false paradigm. You don't even know that we're on a globe. So to say global warming, it's like, first of all, figure out what reality plane you're even in before you go throwing around these notions. But when you say global warming, typically it's an excuse for the blue hairs to get pissed at conservatives. That's what it's for. It's a division campaign. Just like Black Lives Matter, just like all these endless wars. They're just division campaigns, highly profitable division campaigns. But as people feed in to the false nomenclature, they give the false filament traction. Because now you're believing that you're on a globe just because it's in the question. All of their double-edged sword, virtue signally, Trojan horse laced questions are there for this. These questions aren't there to try to find a solution. No. These are false questions concocted by AI and other sinister-minded humans that have been possessed and have gone far too long unchecked. And they concoct statements like these, or social distancing, these very automated, binary sounding statements that are very inhuman. So the more that one feeds in to these false things, no matter how self-righteous you think you are, and the willingness to be correct is like a stronger force. So let's say, for instance, gravity exists exactly as they say it does. Well, the electromagnetic force very quickly conquers it. So we'll liken the electromagnetic force to your will to be correct. So they always know that they can play off the more dominant force. People will allow a false question to permeate all of society so long as they get to be correct. And when you arm either both sides, or if it's multiple sides in their multiple choice, with enough information to make any side seem legitimate, especially in their own eyes, now you can see what gets used against you constantly. So they flood the zeitgeist full of false assumptions, thinking that veganism, which is this glorified emaciation, is somehow for the animals, and it's for you wrong people to be right. And usually, and just to add a little bit more nuance to that,
it's usually females that can pull off being a vegan, because men work really hard, and I love the reasons that you do it. If you're loving animals, that's great. We all do. But when you get so hung up on the question and the desperation to defend it, now you know they've got you. It was never about the question to begin with. It's about rooting you into a false reality, a false perception of thinking that it's a globe at all. Nobody knows. Maybe we're on a globe. I'm not against it. I'm not against being on a planet called Earth. I'm not against being in a reality plane with just a bunch of bubbles on it that are called planets, but they're just round borders. Either way, it's fine. That's not the question. The question is when you choose a dualistic mind state and a three-dimensional justification for these improperly structured questions when they know the base on either is unfounded. That's the kind of game that you're playing. Look, but don't touch. Touch, don't taste. Taste, but don't swallow. Devil's Advocate covered that. You know this. It's the same way the sticky-fingered big noses like to play. That pattern of leading the horse to toxic water, that pattern emerges in all forms of trickery. The trickery comes from the same source, because we can see they leave their calling card in every one of them. Now, of course, they'll try to forbid you from talking about it. Of course. But once you peel back enough layers of the onion, then you start to realize you're in one. It's not an on and off switch. There's layers and layers and layers of it. But as you experience success in peeling back these layers, and you now have the eyes to see the levels of deception that perhaps once ensnared you, then that gives you a little better acceleration towards peeling off more layers. Once you start to peel that orange, the first is always the toughest because you have to pierce the layer and then tear. But that second half of the orange peel comes off much easier than the first. So, happy peeling of yourself to reveal the kingdom within.